Will the Waqf bill take away Muslims' land in India? What is the whole controversy all about? Why does the Modi government want to amend the existing laws? To understand this and much more, I'm joined by my colleague Ashmit Kumar, who's been covering this issue extensively. Ashmit, thank you for joining us. Now, the government has tabled the Waqf Amendment Bill 2025 to improve the administration of Waqf properties. Let's start with the basics first. Before we talk about the bill, what exactly is Waqf and why the Waqf boards that are India's largest, one of the largest landowners after the armed forces and the railways in the spotlight at the moment?
Well, it is an interesting question to start with. Thank you for that. You're right. Waqf board properties account for the third largest grouping of properties in the country. The estimates are in the range of about 8 to 9.5 lakh acres. So we're talking about some very, very large numbers here. But that's a good question to begin from as to what exactly is Waqf. Waqf essentially is if I, as a practicing Muslim, if I were to choose to donate a property that I own to a Waqf, that would essentially mean that it wouldn't necessarily be confined only to a property. To say, if I have a car, or if I have a house, or if I have a piece of land somewhere in Noida, that I want to then contribute towards the broader Muslim community for a charitable purpose. So whether that's setting up of a mosque, or a madrasa, or maybe a graveyard, or maybe a charitable hospital, these are charitable ends to which I can donate. There are, however, a few caveats to bear in mind. Number one, once this land is donated, it is irrevocable. So today, it can't be a situation, at least as per the existing law, the one that we have, the Waqf Act of 1995. It can't be a situation that I have a piece of land, that I give it to a Waqf, and then maybe a month later realize that maybe I didn't want that, so I want it back. No, it's irrevocable. So once it's gone, it's gone. It's gone for the charitable purpose. The ownership then travels from me, a practicing Muslim, to the Waqf board. The Waqf board then takes charge of that property. As to how many Waqf boards there are, well, there are as many as 32 state Waqf boards. So it's a vast network, and this is a state-wise network where there are state Waqf boards. They enjoy their rights over the Waqf property. They manage that property, how that property is to be used, whether it is to be used for a mosque or for a hospital. These are ends, or for an educational institution for that matter. These are purposes. These are objects which are then realized. These are actions which are taken by the Waqf board. There's of course one governing council called the Central Council, which sits as an oversight mechanism between all these Waqf board. But that, in simple words, is essentially what a Waqf is. That if I have a piece of land, and if I want to donate it to a Waqf so that they can manage it for a charitable purpose. So a mosque, an educational institution, and a hospital. So this is a mechanism that essentially helps me do that. And that is the way it's been given a framework in our country in the form of a Waqf mechanism, a Waqf board. And that is what is basically being debated today in the parliament.
Right. So for the benefit of our viewers, if you could explain what is the problem then? Is the problem with the management? There's also reports of encroachment because the documentation doesn't exist. So what is the problem? What is the need to amend the existing laws?
Well, there's been a lot of criticism in terms of how these Waqf boards are working, how they're managing these properties. Again, we're talking about very large assets here. Like we said at the very beginning, the estimates, the total land holding, and this is not even counting their non-land assets. Correct. They're just their land assets. Estimates range between 8 lakh to 9.5 lakh crores. The value of this is pegged at somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.9 lakh crore rupees. So these are very, very large figures. That's one. That here's a land bank being managed by the Waqf board with very vast powers but little oversight. That is one key criticism. The other question that is leveled, and this is one aspect that we find coming from the government or proponents of the bill who are advocating for the bill, they say they've made a case of land grabbing. Yeah. And in this case, there's one section, in fact, section 40 that has been removed. That section did, in fact, give sweeping powers to the Waqf board, whereby they, like Archana, they could look at your property and in case of any dispute in terms of who owns that property, the Waqf board could, in fact, start adjudication proceedings, could have a case, could delegate to itself the property, and then that decision would be final. So these were sweeping powers that they had, and this in fact has been cited by proponents of the bill that yes indeed there are sweeping powers, yes indeed a case can be made out in terms of land grabbing. This was the second key criticism. The third was, and this is with respect to representation, the overarching council, we remember we talked about 32 state Waqf boards, and then there's an overarching council. The council provides for representation of women, for 2 women to be specific. In the Waqf board, there is no women representation. So this was the key criticism, that half of the population, half of the Muslim population is not represented as a part of these Waqf boards. So decision makings would naturally not take into account concerns or issues that women, Muslim women may want to raise because they are just not there on the decision making boards. This was the third key criticism. Another criticism was with respect to sects within the Muslim community. So we're all aware of the Shia community, the Sunni community. The concern was that are they suitably represented on the board to make decisions on behalf of their community, to make decisions on behalf of land that their community has given to the Waqf board. So this was another key anomaly that was pointed out that has been raised by the government as well, is that are various sects being adequately represented? And finally, the issue number 5, the criticism number 5 that was leveled is that are they being well managed? Again, we go back to the same question, very large assets. How are they being managed? Are they being managed with the best practices in mind? Are they being audited? What is the mechanism for that? These are questions that came up in terms of good governance practices in terms of managing these assets. If you look at it as a large asset management company, the Waqf board, which is of course guided towards charitable purposes, but are they following good practices in terms of management of these vast tracts of land? So these are broadly the criticisms that were thrown their way.
Correct. So now that we've understood what a Waqf is, and now that we've understood what the problem was, let's try to understand what the new bill proposes to do. What are the proposed amendments?
Well, there are a number of key amendments. Like we began at the very outset, one of the key provisions that has been in fact not introduced but rather omitted as a part of this amendment bill is section 40. This was a sweeping power that the Waqf board had. So in case of in case there was any lack of legal certainty over Archana's house, and that section 40 gave the Waqf board the power that I could set up legal proceedings, I could set up adjudication proceedings, where I could then, through that process of adjudication, through that process of decision making, decide the fate of your house. Now this, of course, there's a legal process there were legal remedies as well, but this section 40 was touted as perhaps a land grabbing power that was given to the Waqf board. This is a claim that came from the government, a claim that came from various proponents of the bill. That section 40 has been removed entirely. So that's one key change that we're seeing. Another key change was made is that there was an element of finality given to the decisions that were taken by the Waqf board as well as by the Waqf tribunals. Decisions taken by the Waqf boards can be challenged before Waqf tribunals, and barring certain consequences, there was an element of finality given to the tribunal decisions. The aspect that this bill seeks to bring in is that, no, that's not fair. We need to have judicial accountability, and that towards that end, they've introduced this mechanism of decisions now also being challenged before the high courts. So that is another key element that this bill is trying to bring in. Then we talked about representation of women, representation of certain sects. That has been provided for as a part of this new bill, that both at the council level as well as at the Waqf board level, there need to be women, there need to be suitable representation of various sects. The one aspect, however, that has invited a lot of criticism is that there is a very clear provision, distinct provision at both the board level as well as the council level, that there need to be 2 non-Muslim members, and this is in fact proving to be an irritant between various stakeholders. Even some of the parties that are supporting this, they've raised this concern. Speaking of parties who are supporting this, another key aspect to bear in mind is that Waqf by use, that's an important piece of this entire framework that is being proposed. Waqf by use essentially says that if a property has been used for religious or charitable purposes, say suppose as a mosque, for time immemorial, then that property can be deemed to be a Waqf property. This was in fact, the bill is trying to do away with this. The bill says that will no longer happen. Just because a property is being used as a mosque for time immemorial does not mean that it will then be designated as a Waqf property. This is something that the bill is trying to do away with. This is something that parties such as the JDU, such as the TDP, who have a vote bank of their own to respond to answer to, have in fact flagged. They flagged this before the government, they flagged this before the JPC, and it's only then that there seems to be a clarity that has come by way of the latest bill, that look, this will not apply retrospectively, this will only apply prospectively, but even with that caveat, what the government is saying that it won't apply retrospectively unless there is a dispute regarding the property or unless it is a government property. So that's the one caveat that has been given to parties such as the JDU, such as the TDP, who had raised concerns. Also, going forward with respect to the oversight mechanism, the centre has been given powers to ensure that there is an audit mechanism. The state governments have been given audit powers. There are also, in fact, the Waqf boards will have to furnish the data of the properties that they have on a portal that the centre will create. So this is an oversight mechanism that the government hopes to introduce that will bring in more transparency. That's of course the pitch that they're giving. We heard Kiren Rijiju today talk in the parliament and give that clarity that this transparency is essentially what the government is hoping will clear the air, at least as far as the Waqf board and the concerns that were raised.
I wanted to understand from you, you also mentioned about politics there. Why is the opposition saying that this bill is anti-Muslim, and what is their criticism? What is that they find, and other experts, a lot of scholars have called that this is very anti-minority?
Well, the concern that has been raised is again the sheer oversight that the government is being given. Kiren Rijiju, while presenting this bill today in the parliament in the Lok Sabha, he himself said that there are ample powers being given to the state government. The question that the opposition is asking, why? Why is it that this structure, this framework of powers is being introduced when there are already enough safeguards in that? For instance, let's talk about the fact that that there was an element of finality. The bill proposes, Kiren Rijiju today said that there is an element of finality that a board decision has, that effectively saying that if the board says that Archana's property is mine, it remains to a Waqf property. That's the concern that the government put across. The impression that the government has given is that there is no legal remedy available to Archana. What the opposition leaders are essentially arguing is that, look, there is already a provision. There are already provisions within the existing act that that provide for these decisions to be challenged at the High Court level. So if there is already such a decision, there is already such a mechanism in place, why introduce this amendment? This was one. Another key concern, and I missed out on some of the key changes that we were discussing only a couple of minutes back. One of the key changes is that for a person to declare a property to be a Waqf property, that person will have to be a practicing Muslim for a 5-year period.
Okay.
So this is something that again has been challenged by the opposition leaders, that why are we restricting it only to a Muslim who's been practicing for 5 years? What if I've been a practicing Muslim for 3 years? So I cannot donate that property? Why that bar? Why that distinction? For that matter, one of the voices coming in from the opposition also says that what about non-Muslims who want to contribute towards the Waqf? Why can they not do that? Why do they need to be a practicing Muslim, that too for a 5-year period, to in fact go ahead and to do this? And to donate this property in terms of Waqf. This is one. The third is with respect to the composition of the Waqf board, the Waqf council, the nature and the tweaks that have been made. For instance, when we talk about the overarching council that sits on top of the 32 state Waqf boards, the question, one of the tweaks that has been made is that the ex officio chairperson will of course be a union minister. Subsequently, the original Act of 1995 detailed a lot of members who have to be a part of this. So whether that's retired judges, advocates, scholars in Muslim law. One tweak that has been made is that 3 MPs have now, which were originally supposed to be only Muslims, will now need not necessarily be Muslims. And then there's the additional caveat of having 2 non-Muslims as well as a part of this overarching governance council. Why is that? Why can Muslims not be trusted to govern their own affairs is a claim that the opposition leaders have made. And of course, it all boils down to the fact that there is a great deal of limiting of powers of these Waqf boards. So whether we talked about omission of Section 40, if that Section 40 is removed, if that power is stripped from the Waqf board to decide on its own as to which properties qualify as Waqf and which are not, that again will be a huge stripping of powers of the Waqf board and will essentially the question coming from the opposition leaders is it will strip the minority community of its rights to govern its own properties. And that is something that is playing on the minds. Another key aspect, one change again I missed out on pointing out earlier, is that one aspect, and this is an important change, needs to be highlighted, is that this new bill very clearly provides that any government property cannot in any shape or form be declared as a Waqf property, and this will also apply not just prospectively but will also apply retrospectively. So essentially what we're looking at is that, let's assume there's a parcel of land, again for benefit, for sake of this argument, let's say here in Noida, which is a government piece of land but which has been under use by the Waqf for many years now, let's say for the last 20-30 years. That decision will now get reversed.
Oh, okay.
So that is again a case in point being made by the opposition leaders, that these provisions will then be used to strip the Waqf board of the lands that they're governing, strip the Waqf board of the lands that they're operating over for these charitable purposes, and that eventually all of these aspects will accumulate and will add towards stripping the minority community of their individual rights. This, of course, is the claim being put forth by the opposition leaders. The government, of course, on its part is trying to clarify its position that, look, we want to bring in more transparency. We want to have a little bit of more oversight. There is a bubble in which the Waqf is operating.
Correct.
We want to pierce that bubble and with an element of oversight, and nothing wrong in having more oversight, nothing wrong in having more state governance, state governments looking at it, the centre asking for an audit, nothing wrong in that. That's the government's pitch, that look, we want transparency, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and therefore we want a more careful look at the assets that the Waqf is managing and how they're going about this entire exercise.
Correct. And as you mentioned, even Mr. Rijiju mentioned in his speech that the Prime Minister had to take the Parliament land because it was could you elaborate more on that?
Well, there are a number of cases, in fact, that were highlighted in the course of the day, as well as we've seen this conversation build up from August of last year, where there was conversation about sometimes even temple land being subsumed into the Waqf property, lands of farmers being subsumed. Now, these are all stories that were put out, which help towards perhaps guiding the conversation in a certain direction. But we need to bear in mind that these are very nuanced conversations. We're seeing the debate here for the first time in the Lok Sabha between the opposition leaders as well. They've been served with copies of the new bill. It's only recently that the JPC came out in January with its report and its recommendations, and now we're seeing a rebuttal, of course, being given by the opposition parties as well. So a number of nuances here, a number of concerns which are being raised by the opposition parties as well. Kiren Rijiju there presenting the bill, standing firm on his position that, at least as far as the government's rationale is, they're standing firm with their mantra that sunlight is the best disinfectant. We'll use that. We'll ensure more transparency, and that's the pitch. We'll, of course, have to see till the end of the day how this progresses in terms of getting a vote.
Yeah, and in his speech, he also said that इस bill से सिर्फ मुसलमानों की नहीं पूरे देश की तरक्की होगी. So we'll have to wait and watch what the response is as far as these amendments are concerned. Thank you so much, Ashmit, for making time and explaining to us what these amendments are and why the government is introducing these amendments in the first place. And that's it from me and my team. Thank you for watching this special explanation on the Waqf Amendment Bill.